Since it first started tumbling into Ireland through the old pirate coves of West Cork and in the stomachs of drug mules coming from Miami, cocaine has become the drug of our nation. It has swept in like a blizzard, dusting every corner of every small town, and so swift and total has its spread been that the Irish are now some of the biggest users in the world. But to unravel how a small island like ours on the edge of Europe ended up such a big player in the major cocaine leagues, we must follow the white supply lines back to the beginning. We must follow the routes it has taken as it travels across the globe. And most importantly, we need to follow the cowboys who put us on the map. So join me, Nicola Talent, for my new live show, Cocaine Cowboys, the story of Ireland's love affair with Colombia's biggest export. Limited tickets now available for February 10th at the Lime Tree Theatre in Limerick, February 15th in Cork's Everyman, and at Dublin's 3 Olympia on Sunday, February 18th. Tickets available at venues or on mcd.ie. Look, there's developments and, we'll talk about them because they've been published. So we're not kind of breaching any thing. The fact of the matter is there's a number of members of the Gardai who are moving out to Dubai for the coming months, and they're going to really manage what's happening next. The next step in this sort of attempt to dismantle the Kinahan organised crime group. What we think the next step is going to be will be the Irish will essentially ask the United Arab Emirates, can they have Sean McGovern? Because there's a warrant for him. He is essentially charged here, or will be as soon as he gets back, in relation to the murder of Noel Duckegg Kerwin. So he's a really significant character, McGovern, and we're going to go back over his life and his rise, first in the Byrne organised crime group and then in the Kinahan grouping, and to bring him to where he is now, which is Daniel Kinahan's right-hand man.
Yeah.
And that's what he's been for the last sort of 7 years since he's been out in Dubai. Is that right? 7 years nearly he's been in Dubai.
Something like that. I mean, I suppose, he's become a internationally well-known figure because he was named in when the US Treasury put out the wanted notices really for the Kinahan, the Daniel Christie Jr. and Christie Sr. Sean McGovern was mentioned. He was pictured. I think it was actually just one of those Facebook pictures we had used a lot, but the Americans took it, the US Treasury, and described him as Daniel Kinahan's right man, effectively. So, I mean, it's a long, he's over in Dubai, but it's a long way from where he started. I remember the first time, actually, I saw his name, if you remember the Bebo. You remember Bebo?
I do.
And we did a story about the younger generation of the Crumlin Drimnagh feud, who were then only 18, 19, and they were exchanging taunts on social media. Not much has changed, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it was on Bebo then.
Except it was on Bebo. And there was a page set up, Fat Freddy's Rats.
Right.
And it mentioned a load of these names who didn't really mean a lot, some of them at that stage. But Sean McGovern was mentioned. There was other people like Mad Dog E. Maloney, for example, who probably wasn't as well known. Certainly, he's obviously now become a poet and is writing poetry. But there was about 15 names, and Sean McGovern was one of them.
So that brings us back. We do need to go back in time, and we're going to go back to, I suppose, the turn of the century.
Yeah.
We're in the late 90s, the early 2000s, and this gang from Crumlin Drimnagh are teenagers, they're coming of age, many of them worked under John Gilligan and been introduced to some of his wholesalers as teenagers. You have Brian Rattigan and Declan Gavin, the two sort of alpha males of this large grouping of school friends, relatives. They're a mini mob already. And of course, Gavin and Rattigan as two alpha males are clashing. They're doing business together, but they are not friends, and the rivalries are starting. And I think people are starting to line up.
Yeah.
Of course, that rivalry culminates in the killing of Declan Gavin by Brian Rattigan at the Abracababra takeaway there on the Sundrive Road, the end of the Sundrive Road?
Yeah.
And that moment, Declan Gavin is, come out of town from a night out. He goes into the takeaway, starts maybe pestering a few women. Brian Rattigan is actually attending his brother Joey's 18th birthday party. He's full of cocaine, full of drink. He hears Gavin is there and he races up the road, gets a lift, gets out of a back of a car, absolutely out of control, knife in hand, and he goes in and stabs him to death.
Yeah.
Now that moment is witnessed by a number of people, and one of them is Anita Freeman.
Yeah, and one of them is David Byrne. David Byrne.
They're there.
They're there, obviously, with Declan Gavin.
Or else they're coming from somewhere else. Everyone gathers at this takeaway on the way home.
Yeah, but certainly David Byrne at that point would have been an associate and would have, been hanging around with Declan Gavin. So they witnessed this. I mean, I think ultimately there was pictures of the scene were published, which are really, really shocking in terms of the level of blood loss that Declan Gavin had gone through, and you could see it on the floor of the takeaway. And one of the people who witnessed this is a young woman at that stage called Anita Freeman. And Anita Freeman is now over in Dubai with Sean McGovern because they were childhood sweethearts. Sean McGovern is a bit younger than the Byrne brothers, Liam and David, but even at that stage, he was becoming sort of a key associate of theirs. Obviously, after that stabbing, that feud began in earnest, really, from that point. And there was multiple murders over the next few years, not to go into them. Some people give the figure of 18, I think, but some of these are, like what happened in the Hutch Kinahan feud, some of these are kind of sub-feuds within a feud. And, it depends how you categorise it. But there was a huge amount of blood, of deaths, really.
And after Gavin died, of course, Fat Freddie Thompson stood into his boots, basically, and sort of became the visual leader of that grouping, which included his cousins, the Byrne brothers, their friend, Sean McGovern, and many others that
we're still talking about to this day.
We're still talking about to this day. So
I mean,
a big group of them, basically.
Yeah. But I mean, what people always said about Fat Freddie was he was kind of maybe the figure in the front, maybe, as opposed to the man who was really directing or masterminding the drug dealing operation, I suppose. Fat Freddie was seen as a kind of a soldier rather than a general, maybe. So over time, Freddie Thompson would have been in and out of the country, served a couple of prison sentences for sort of assaults and various things. But as the Kinahan Cartel really became established in Port Benous, the Byrne organisation rose alongside with them, I suppose. And they became much more important than Fat Freddie Thompson ever did. And alongside the rise of the Byrne grouping, Sean McGovern, who became who went from being maybe not a decisive figure in that organisation, became more and more important. And in the minds of people, I suppose, who know these guys, maybe a slightly smarter operator, a bit more of somebody that could be trusted to manage business parts of it. He rose rapidly as well.
So basically, while Thompson was essentially known as a bit of a murder machine, and he was doing all the dirty work of the gang, behind the scenes, they were becoming more organised. They were going from being teenagers, young adults, to men who were becoming serious players in the cocaine trade, which is what was kind of bringing in the money for them all. Of course, the Byrne brothers had pedigree, they had criminal pedigree. Their own father, James Jaws Byrne, was a guy who was suspected of being the man who always supplied the passports, the false passports. He had a bit of a business in that.
I mean, he was also, if you look back on stuff the Sunday World did at the time, Jaws Byrne was also a regular over in Port Benous as the Kinahans got established. And, his sons, Liam and David, who had been initially dealing with criminals, getting supplied by drugs, in Dublin by other people who were bringing them in, seemed to have moved into the business of getting them in themselves effectively.
But having him there and his connections, and he, of course, was connected both to Jerry the Monk Hutch, he was connected to Christy Kinahan Sr. I mean, a guy who provides something as vital as passports, is going to know everybody. So that gave them a bit of extra kudos that maybe Freddie Thompson didn't have.
Yeah.
Also, their sister Joanne Byrne married Thomas Bomber Kavanagh.
Yeah.
They were initially living in Drimna. Kavanagh in 96 becomes one of the first targets of the Criminal Assets Bureau, and they migrate to the UK, where he sets up on the front of it a car business, but actually he's running a massive big, again, cocaine business in the UK. He establishes himself very quickly, and I think through basically the threat level that he sort of that emanates around him and some connections he had there, he became a serious player in the Birmingham area. So that in itself makes the Byrnes more significant as well. And like, I'm saying all that because I do think that Sean McGovern is a player.
Yeah.
He knows who to align himself with. He knows who to charm.
Yeah.
And he certainly does that. And as the time goes on, you can see, and yes, they are very much the Byrnes over and back to Portabanus. They're integrating themselves into the Kinahan network. They're becoming the Dublin arm of the Kinahan network, while Bomber is being, groomed essentially by Daniel Kinahan to become his UK connection. And that sort of is all emerging. But McGovern sort of sets his sight on Liam. Yeah. Of the two brothers. Liam is probably the more business-minded. One of them, David Byrne, the late David Byrne, was always a bit of a party guy. You know, he loved to go out. He loved to have a bit of fun. Liam definitely was the more stable of the two. And from a business positioning point of view, I think he was the one that Bomber Kavanagh saw as the leader of the organisation, the real leader of the organisation here in Dublin.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, McGovern is so close to Liam Byrne at this point that he moves in kind of just up the road from him. They go into business together. They set up a car sales, again, sort of a twinning with Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, called LS Active Car Sales. It actually has a premises there.
Yeah.
Maybe it had a garage at the back of Raleigh Square, and then it had a premises somewhere. They were bringing in and out cars from the UK. There was no doubt they weren't actually running a proper legitimate business. They were using the cars as currency, which would come up later in the Criminal Assets Bureau case. But they're becoming more and more organised if you follow their trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, Sean McGovern is not unlike people like Fat Freddie Thompson or other people associated with him, like we're talking about people like Mad Dog Maloney. They're picking up all these convictions. They're picking up convictions for assaults. They're getting in trouble. They're, being arrested for stuff. Fat Freddie Thompson, if you remember at the time, this sort of in the 2010s, he's, being pictured going in and out of Garda station wearing wigs, posing for the cameras sometimes. So there's all these things going on. He's getting in and out of the country because of threats. Sean McGovern is not, these sort of things aren't happening to him. He's much more controlled and under the radar. I don't think he's any particularly significant convictions. I do think he has a few of a very minor type. So he becomes a registered owner of some of these businesses and a registered director. And at that stage, as you said, the car business becomes really a massive money laundering scheme, effectively. And you saw that was ultimately unpicked by CAB, where they sort of went through how it was being used, how people were having use of these luxury cars, but weren't in theory only renting them out, and it became a way in which to have a lovely car effectively, but you don't have to hand over money and appear to have bought it. So therefore, you're not in theory. They weren't vulnerable to CAB, and they didn't have to explain how they're driving, because they were driving these incredible cars. Also, during this time, Sean McGovern buys a house, as you said, a few hundred metres away from where Liam Byrne is.
Kildare Road, isn't it?
Kildare Road. And again, that's bought. He lives there. He does it up. He does exactly what Liam Byrne did, which is spend the value of the house again, if not more, on fixtures and fitting. But again, CAB would eventually unravel that. And of all of the purchases, it was the most complex, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was an incredibly, you see the level, I suppose, at which they're at. I can't remember exactly what year it was, maybe 2000 and in the early 2010s, I think it was
I
bought.
have it in my head that the money that was transferred for the purchase of the thing was in and around the 250,000 mark.
It was, and what it was it was in an offshore. It was done through an offshore bank account somewhere in the Caribbean, wasn't it?
Mauritius,
sorry.
trust fund, I think.
Trust fund, and the trust fund was ultimately connected with a guy called James Mulvey. And James Mulvey is a first cousin of Bomber Kavanagh. He's serving something like 20 years for various drugs trafficking offences. He was a guy based in Birmingham, and there was a long, elaborate court case where we heard about him. Despite being Bomber Kavanagh's first cousin, he ultimately would be recorded speaking about his fear of Bomber Kavanagh, who he did called glasses, I think, during the trial. James Mulvey was a major player in the drugs business in Birmingham, who was basically working underneath Bomber Kavanagh. Eventually fled, I think it was to Lithuania, and was picked up. So you see, in some ways, it was suggested, I think, in the cab case that because of a drugs debt, James Mulvey had arranged this purchase through this offshore account in Mauritius, and that's how Sean McGovern became the beneficial owner of
Kildare Road, yeah. And he's living there with Anita Freeman, his childhood sweetheart. I mean, himself and Liam are similar in that they have these stable family sort of lives, very stable, very, there's never a suggestion, certainly I could say about Liam, that he was straying or he was anything like that. He seems to be a family man. Yeah. And I think McGovern the same. The women, Natasha McEnroe would be
Brian Rattigan's, but it'd be Simone.
Sorry, Simone McEnroe, I meant.
She's a cousin, of course,
a cousin of Natasha McEnroe.
Which is another little irony, because obviously those two, Brian Rattigan and Liam Byrne, would have been mortal enemies at that stage. But so, I mean, Anita Freeman, Sean McGovern actually had in fairness, I think he did have a Bebo page back in the day, but he was like Liam Byrne. They weren't really on social media themselves. They were on other people's
more low key, I think, is what.
Exactly.
And the women, like Anita Freeman, would have been very friendly with Simone McEnroe and also with
Kelly Quinn.
Kelly Quinn, who was David Byrne's partner, and they all hung out together. The women, and they liked to go. They liked a nice lifestyle. They would go off to hotels together. They were like I suppose an ordinary group of friends that intermarry.
But it was a very tight-knit group, I suppose.
Very tight.
That allowed them to sort of operate in a more controlled manner. So you didn't have, Sean McGovern wasn't, like you hear all sorts of notorious things about other gangland criminals and their crazy lifestyle and going on coke binges, but you didn't hear that so much. But they had a really tight group of people that they obviously felt could be trusted under all conditions. And, were...
Yeah, I mean, look, their kids hung out, their wives hung out, they hung out, they were friends from childhood. They were more than just a grouping of criminals coming together, And there was an awful lot of family bonds there as well, which made it very difficult really for the, to get intelligence out of the gang, because you were trying to, I suppose, break through blood bonds as well as anything else. But
so they were the good days, but the
heydays I was going to come on to was 2013, 2014, 15. And that's when the Byrnes started showing and making really big money, as did Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. The aftermath, the sort of reverberations, I think, of Operation Shovel had calmed, and they were making a lot of money. And McGovern does start driving pretty fancy cars, BMWs. I think he supplies Anita Freeman with a similar kind of matching BMW car. They start becoming a bit more showy than they previously were. And the Byrnes were turning heads in this country around that time because of the display of wealth. There was nothing low-key about them. They were feeling a confidence and a wealth that, they were beginning to feel that little bit untouchable. Now, ultimately, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh was the man in charge, and he used to come in and out of the country in bigger and better motors and with loads of gifts for everybody. And I think somebody he did respect and trust was McGovern.
Yeah.
Because he was difficult to get him to like you, I think.
Yeah.
Kavanagh, he was very paranoid, very cruel, very mean, but he saw something in McGovern, an ambition, maybe his business skills.
Yeah, I think a bit more ability to control his manner. You know what I mean? You see other figures like maybe Graham Whelan, the weak Whelan, and you hear him when he's being arrested and he's melting off the police and all of that sort of stuff. McGovern doesn't seem to have been like that. And of course, around that time you're talking where if you remember, which is kind of hard to comprehend at this stage really, but Daniel Kinahan and Christie Jr. were regularly flying back into Ireland for boxing events.
Yeah.
And at those events, you'd see, as you said, it's the heyday, and the Burns and Sean McGovern and the Kinahan brothers, they're all hanging around together. It's all one happy organisation. They're all going to the weigh-ins. Liam Brannigan is there. And it's all going well. And
you'd nearly say at that point that McGovern is almost like a brother to the Burns.
Yeah, he's
very much in the family folds, you know. He's living within their sort of, would you call it, their sort of stronghold, their compound almost, which was, he was in and out of Sadie and Jaws Burns' house. He was like a member of the family, really, really, really tight there with Liam.
Holidaying always together, all that sort of stuff.
So that brings us up to the Regency Hotel.
Yeah.
And Sean McGovern was actually injured at the Regency Hotel because he was shot along with another guy called Aaron Bulger, who was originally from Tala and had moved out to Spain for a period of time and was, associating with the Kinahans. But McGovern was shot. Stray bullet? Or was he targeted?
Well, I mean, I don't know, actually. I presume it's not, nobody's ever said who they were looking to shoot. But
he was shot in the leg.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that Sean McGovern would have been somebody who would have been was a target, but it's not clear. But it's also not clear for the single reason that he never gave a statement.
No.
He was questioned, like they obviously sought a statement off him about being shot, but he wouldn't give a statement to the police.
Remember that night, it was, the rumours were flying around after the Regency, and there was a lot of energy in the air, and I was getting texts all night. McGovern's dead. No, sorry, he's alive. McGovern's definitely dead. No, he's not. Oh, no, he's just injured. And then I eventually got this text, he'd been dead about 5 times.
Yeah.
And I eventually got this text saying McGovern's checked himself out of the hospital. Yeah. So he was definitely not dead. Yeah. And that's what he did. He checked himself out of the hospital. I think Brady was Aaron Bulger was a few days in hospital. I recall Bulger posted a selfie of himself in the hospital bed with his thumbs up. But that, I suppose, the loss of David Byrne, who was almost a brother to McGovern, that shooting of him, which the likelihood is that he was targeted, and maybe, he was targeted in the same way that Byrne was.
Yeah.
I mean, the grouping that still unidentified exactly, but the Hutch faction that went into the Regency that day knew everybody. So it wasn't a random,
No, it'd be surprising.
They knew them, they had been...
Yeah. I mean, and also if you see in the aftermath, I think the couple of days after when David Byrne's body is returned to his family, you see then there's a core group who will visit the family home. Including Daniel Kinahan, who walks in with Bomber Kavanagh, who's pictured walking in with Bomber Kavanagh. But Sean McGovern is one of those guys. He's in there, and at that point, there's still that unity, and that unity is expressed during the funeral when they're all standing side to side, but that unity probably breaks down over the next period of time. I think it's fair to say
unity with
the Kinahan organisation and the Byrne organisation. It doesn't.
Well, I think really that picture of Bomber Kavanagh and Daniel Kinahan shows that they, look, Daniel Kinahan was the target at the Regency. He got away. David Byrne was shot dead, who was Bomber Kavanagh's brother-in-law. They both had skin in the game then against the Hutch faction.
Yeah.
And they did come together as a murderous duo.
Yeah.
And Bomber, because he was in England and had people here on the ground in Ireland, kind of became he was doing Daniel Kinahan's bidding for him. Daniel Kinahan goes back to Spain and very quickly moves on out to the Gulf, where he's very much still involved in ordering what's happening on the ground here. But I mean, the actual mechanisms of it, a lot of it is controlled by Bomber Kavanagh and his people. And, certainly I remember those first 2 years, which was when, you know, most of the murders happened, until I suppose really the Gardaí got enough people behind bars and enough hit teams were taken off the streets. But hearing over and over again that Sean McGovern was very much at the fore of organising and, you know, deciding, I was told, who lived and who died.
Yeah.
And so McGovern had got himself into that position between, I suppose, his relationship with Bomber Kavanagh and what we would later sort of discover was an even closer relationship with Daniel Kinahan.
Yeah, I mean, he became, I suppose, if you were to describe it as in company terms, is what would be called a sort of operations officer or operations director, where, you know, they have a sort of a board who make decisions, but you have someone that's then carried out. Somebody directs the how it's carried out effectively, and in a sense, it is believed that that was Sean McGovern's role. That, you know, Daniel Kinahan and Bomber may interact with people here and there, but, you know, they would then delegate these really important things to Sean McGovern, who deal with a range of guys just as a step below that, you know.
And he's also a trusted advisor. I mean, if you're looking at it in political terms, he is the guy behind the scenes whispering in the ear of the president, telling him what to do.
Yeah.
Because he seems to become more and more that. I mean, he does have an ambition from the beginning, and he is trusted and brought into the inner circle. I think he's really pretty clever.
Yeah.
And he's not a diplomat.
No.
He's whispering the right things in the right ears. I mean, he is the one who is kind of looking at the situation on the ground and deciding who's next, basically.
But
so he's a dangerous, very ruthless character at this point.
Very ruthless. And I mean, obviously then you can see with some of those murder plots that there's, if you look at the Byrne organised crime group who are supplying weapons and supplying these people, but there's also them really Daniel Kinahan loyalists, and the connecting point between them seems to be Sean McGovern as much as anything. But obviously then, as the feud continues, more and more people are getting picked up, more and more of these attempted plots, say against Patsy Hutch or, you know, Michael Gately. There's people starting to get arrested, people starting to have to leave the country. And Sean McGovern, I mean, we don't know the exact day he departed to Dubai, but he is gone, I suppose, following as the investigation heats up into Noel Duckegg Kirwan's.
He's gone immediately after the murder of Noel Duckegg Kirwan, in between that and I suppose that Regency.
Yeah.
The Criminal Assets Bureau go after the Byrne organised crime gang and their homes, and one of the homes they seize, one of the first homes they seize is that one in the Kildare Road. All that evidence of the trust fund comes before the court. I think McGovern and Anita Freeman initially tried to get free legal aid, and evidence of their lifestyle was read through the courts, including travel, the cars they had, the kind of money, and all of that happened. But yes, McGovern remained in the country until the immediate aftermath, basically, of the murder of Noel Duckegg Kirwan, which occurred just before Christmas of 2016. And he went straight out to Dubai, where he immediately is welcomed by Daniel Kinahan, and he very, very quickly is at his side in the way he once was at Liam Byrne's side. He's his advisor, his chief advisor. He's with him, making decisions with him, making arrangements with him.
Yeah. And living close to him. I think at one point living in an apartment that Daniel Kinahan had lived in, as far as we know, at a certain point. Like obviously Daniel Kinahan is there. He's doing all his boxing stuff, appearing on social media, doing interviews and podcasts, as I said. But, you know, they're still directing the operations there. And Daniel Kinahan, as his father as well, they've always tried to keep a step away from doing that, but it all has to be done over electronic communication. And the belief becomes that Sean McGovern becomes, you know, a key figure in directing that part of the criminal organisation. I suppose, like he
sort of appears to start, and maybe this was always the way with him, but he starts to almost enjoy that end of the business, which is the directing of murder.
Yeah.
He sees it as a challenge. He's definitely a much darker figure than
Yeah, because
we ever would have considered him to be.
No, and he possibly doesn't look the type, does he? Like, he doesn't
Yeah.
look particularly intimidating. But I suppose, people at that level of criminality that the Kinahans are at, they need these people that can be absolutely trustworthy. Will I read you out what the American government has said about Sean McGovern?
Do.
Right. So
remind me of this. When was this again? April 22, 21?
April 22. Thank you,
When was this?
Clodagh.
April 22?
Yeah. So this is ultimately when the US Treasury Department had this now famous press conference and read out that the Kinahans, they were putting out a reward for information on the Kinahans. And they named a really, really small group of really key people, if you know what I mean. There's a load of other people involved, but they named people like Johnny Morrissey and Ian Dixon. But one of the people they named because of their significance in the operation was Sean Gerard McGovern, as they call him, Irish national Sean Gerard McGovern, currently based in Dubai, was designated for materially assisting, sponsoring, or providing financial material or technological support for or goods or services to or in support of Daniel Kinahan. McGovern is Daniel Kinahan's advisor and closest confidant, and evidence indicates that all dealings with Daniel Kinahan go through Sean McGovern. Sean McGovern has also managed communications on behalf of Daniel Kinahan, and he sells multi-kilogram quantities of cocaine. So I think at this point, Daniel Kinahan, he's very heavily involved in the boxing world. I don't think Sean McGovern has given directions to boxers or anything like that, but I think Daniel Kinahan has effectively split himself, and any of the criminal actions, the directing of the criminal cartel, the drug dealing, all of that seems to be coming through Sean McGovern. And that's effectively what the American government are saying and have said publicly.
It'll be very interesting to see down the road. Perhaps it will emerge. It's been suggested to me from very good contacts before that McGovern was behind a lot of the social media sites that were being run by the Kinahans. And they included, I need to look back on them, but I remember being, targeted by random Twitter accounts that were claiming to have an interest in a particular murder case because usually an honourable reason.
Yeah.
But it didn't quite make sense why, if somebody was, had the reason. Like, for example, I remember at one point being contacted by this weird looking Twitter site, I think it was, claiming that they had an interest in finding the culprits for Trevor O'Neill's murder. Now, he had been the poor council worker that was killed out in Mallorca while on holidays with his family. And this individual was claiming that they were just trying to dig up a little bit of information here, there and everywhere, and they were going to try and put pressure on Daniel Kinahan. I can't remember exactly what it was, but this person claimed that they had worked with Trevor O'Neill and was trying to kind of feed me basically to go looking at a certain aspect of the Kinahan story. And it was during COVID lockdowns.
Yeah.
And of course, the kind of messages were coming in at peculiar times. And I was like, why would somebody working with the council who wanted to get a bit of publicity for Trevor O'Neill's murder would ever have to be anonymous for a start? Yeah. And, it was a very strange way to go about it. But at one point, this individual said that they were researching some material. They sent me some death notices of actually relatives of Daniel Kinahan and Christy Kinahan Sr., who had sort of disowned them.
Yeah.
And they sent me information to sort of maybe pique my interest in going looking for them. And they said that they had been in the, I said, where'd you get this stuff? Oh, I was down in the ILAC library or something like this, going through when were you doing that last week? Sure, everything was closed in Dublin. So now I had my suspicions beforehand anyway, but it was always suggested to me that those kind of weird communications that you'd get, I don't know whether you got any of them. I mean, I would have probably got them because my name was on a lot of the stories and, I was kind of, I suppose, speaking about it a lot. But that it was, McGovern was behind it. And it was like this sort of, it was always a bit of a head fuck.
Yeah.
He was always trying to play games with you to try and...
Yeah, I think they're trying to extract that little bit of information or direct a certain...
Or amuse themselves.
Yeah,
amuse themselves out in Dubai waiting to see what you answered or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was always very sort of creepy and... you know, you could just see there was a very troubled mind involved in it and a very manipulative mind involved in it. Somebody who had no problem, obviously, you know, pertaining to be.
No, and I mean, one of the other things we did here then as well is that obviously as he grew closer to Daniel Kinahan, I mean, that didn't please Liam Byrne. We did always hear that as well about Sean McGovern, that
he was a little bit jealous.
Yes, maybe. Jealous, or because there seems to have been tensions certainly arose between Liam Byrne and Daniel Kinahan over as things didn't go as planned.
But sure, the Kavanagh-Byrne organisation were destroyed, dismembered by the NCA and the police here, and it seemed as if the Kinahan end of things, Daniel Kinahan and all, were just carrying on regardless in Dubai, which of course they were.
And of course, Sean McGovern was also carrying on regardless in Dubai and living a good life by all accounts, living in great apartments, spending lots of money. So that was a source of tension with the people that he'd been so close to, which is the Byrne organisation.
Now, at one point there, very recently in the last year, his father died, and there was a suggestion that maybe he tried to slip into the country to attend his funeral, but of course he didn't.
No.
He didn't come near. I always think that's quite telling, you know, and also doesn't it show the deeper you go into criminality, the smaller your world becomes, and the kind of the way you have to kind of cut ties. You have to have that ruthlessness to cut the ties. Imagine your father dying and you're not being able to come home to see him.
No, and he's not alone, and that's happened to other people associated with the Kinahans, and
So will he have an exit strategy? Because he's had a long time. He's known since April 2022 that there's a warrant for his arrest, that he's wanted here on charges of murder. He's known all that, and we're only moving now on him to request his extradition. That's expected to happen over the coming months. Will he be still there?
Well, I mean, I suppose look, we don't know how things work over there, do we? Like, we don't know how it works in Dubai. If he was in Ireland, he would be being collated, as I said, by the police. There'd be checks on passports, there'd be all these types of things. What goes on in Dubai, really, we don't know. No. But there does seem to be, the guards and the Dubai authorities seem to have at least come to a good understanding of each other. And you have to imagine that in a society like Dubai, that it'd be difficult for him to get out unnoticed. However, money talks, doesn't it?
Anyway, look, that's where he's at. So that's what's expected over the coming months. And we'll be no doubt one way or another, I think, talking about him a lot. Now, recently, Declan, Mr. Nobody Brady, pleaded guilty in relation to the murder of Noel Duckegg Kerwin. There's been two other people before the courts in relation to it. Martin Casper Aylmer was jailed for 8 years for importing the tracking devices used by the gang to target Kerwin. And
Jason Keating, who's jailed for 10 years, but in the Special Criminal Court for his role in, was described as helping a sinister and ruthless criminal organisation carry out the execution-style murder of Noel Kieran. So again, these charges are nobody has been sentenced to life for murder, but there's been for this broadly what could be considered facilitation of this murder.
And Brady's co-accused, Michael Crotty, of course, has gone on trial because he has pleaded not guilty. So that case is going to be in the news over the coming weeks.
Yeah, that's due to be heard, and he's pleading not guilty. So there's others have pled guilty, but he's pleading not guilty, so that'll go to a full trial.
All right. Well, that's Sean McGovern, Life and Times, and maybe future prospects.
Well, there'll be more podcasts to come, I would imagine.
Okay. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.